Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, as some of you may know, I grew up in suburbia, just east of Spokane. Now, we lived near the freeway, so it was about a 20-minute drive to downtown. I must say, that's one thing that's challenging about Baxter's. It's so far from the freeway. What is up with that? But even that 20-minute drive to downtown seemed like such a great distance. We used to complain about having to drive all the way into town. Now, Spokane is a decent-sized city. It has many of those city problems. You'll find many homeless people milling around the streets downtown. Even on the coldest nights, you'll see cardboard boxes transformed into makeshift shelters for people. But nevertheless, that world seemed so far away from me. I wasn't like those people. They made bad decisions, or they were too lazy to work, or maybe they were just bad people. I didn't know the details, but I knew they weren't like me. And that's why they lived in poverty, while I lived in comfort. I went to church in an affluent suburb where everybody lived pretty good lives. And I went to a school with people who looked like me. So what's the problem with that? Well, last week's reading from Luke 15 dealt with 3 parables of joy. Chapter 16, our reading for today, contains 2 parables that deal with wealth. Our reading for today encompasses the second of those 2 parables. In this parable, 2 men, one is incredibly rich and the other one is horrifically poor. Interestingly, only the poor person is given a name, Lazarus, which in fact, Lazarus is the only person given a name in any of Jesus' parables. But the rich man lived in his opulent house, wearing his fine clothes and feasting sumptuously every day. And it's the same word for feasting that was used in the prodigal son story. But this guy does it every day. While Lazarus sits at his gate, lying on the ground, his body covered with awful sores. His only companions are the dogs that lick his wounds. Well, one night, both men die. The narrator tells us that Lazarus was spirited away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man was buried, but he ended up in Hades. In Hades, the rich man is in incredible torment. He sees Abraham and Lazarus far off. He cries out to Abraham to have mercy. Just send Lazarus to dip his finger in water and just touch it to my tongue. My agony is so great. Ironically, he seems to think he can still order people around. He doesn't even address Lazarus directly, but he does treat him like a servant, someone to be sent. He's still following the old pattern that he did in life. He sees and interacts only with people of his status, ignoring people like Lazarus. But Abraham reminds the rich man that he enjoyed good things in life. So now he must be in torment. Whereas Lazarus only experienced torment in life. So now he enjoys bliss. But even so, it's not possible for Lazarus to visit him because of a great chasm between the 2 places. Then the rich man asks Abraham to send Lazarus to warn his 5 brothers so they don't end up in torment as well. But once again, he's ordering people around. Even stripped of everything and in torment, the rich man doesn't get it. But Abraham assures him that if his brothers ignored Moses and the prophets, they won't pay attention to someone who raises from the dead. And with that, the parable ends. I think it is safe to say that this is a disturbing story. We have wealth, we have poverty, we have death, we have torment, and we have bliss, all in one story. This is not the kind of text that most people would want to read. If we read this in a straightforward manner, we see the theme of reversal, which Jesus frequently uses in his parables and in his teachings. By reversal, I mean what you expect doesn't come to pass. In fact, the opposite comes to pass. In this story, the people at the top are put at the bottom, and the people on the bottom are put on the top. This parable decimates the idea that wealth and status are tied to God's blessing. In fact, if this parable is taken literally, it seems to suggest quite the opposite. Those with wealth and status are the ones who fall short. It is the lowly, like Lazarus, that are truly blessed by God. The parable seems to be saying that if you enjoy good things in this life, you won't in the life to come. Whereas those who experience hardship in this life will enjoy rewards in the afterlife. But that presents a problem for us living in this country. Although very few of us would consider ourselves rich, if you have a household income of just $50,000, you are doing better than 98.1% of the world's population. If we have a home, nice clothes, 3 meals a day, 1 or more vehicles, those are all things that set us apart from much of the world. So that interpretation that living a life of comfort ends up bad in the afterlife, well, that just doesn't bode well for the average USer, since our median household income is over $80,000. Does that mean that all of us are doomed to eternal torment because of our affluent lifestyle? No, just the right-handed people. That was supposed to be funny. I guess there's not enough lefties out there to carry that joke. Sorry about that. Well, I certainly hope that is not the case. Now, Angela Deanhart Hancock, she provides what I think is a very helpful perspective on this parable. Father Abraham tells the rich man that a great chasm separates the rich man and his torment from the bliss of Abraham and Lazarus. But in reality, that chasm already existed, even in life. Hancock points out that in life, the rich man was separated from Lazarus. He probably didn't even see Lazarus. He certainly didn't acknowledge Lazarus as a person with equal dignity to himself, an attribute that he keeps even after death, when he still sees Lazarus like an errant boy. I'm sure he had his reasons, probably considered good reasons in his day. Maybe Lazarus was lazy, or maybe Lazarus didn't have a good work ethic, or maybe Lazarus made bad decisions which left him in squalid poverty, or maybe Lazarus was just a bad dude, and that's why he lived like he did. Whatever the case, the rich man didn't give Lazarus a second thought, even as Lazarus was dying on his doorstep. And notice that the parable nowhere mentions anything about the virtues of Lazarus, only that he suffered in life, so now he enjoys paradise. We can see that a wide chasm already existed between the two of them, even before they passed out of this world. So what was the situation in life continued into the afterlife? Unfortunately, the rich man didn't realize it until it was too late to narrow the chasm. And that brings me to my point. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is always on the side of the marginalized, especially the poor. And Jesus declares that God is on the side of those same marginalized people, with the poor getting a special focus. According to the parable, that tendency continues even into the afterlife. God is with Lazarus. God is on Lazarus' side. The problem for the rich man was that he erected this great chasm between himself and Lazarus. And I'm sure he had his reasons, and undoubtedly everybody in his elite social circle did the same thing. Nevertheless, when his earthly journey ended, he was still separated from Lazarus by a great chasm. Only now there's no way to eliminate it. There's nothing he can do to narrow it. And now Lazarus is in paradise, and the rich man is in torment. So the great chasm wasn't brought about by God, but by the rich man himself. And he suffered the consequences of that even after his death. So we need to not put great chasms between ourselves and the marginalized. We need to realize that in the end, God will be on the side of the marginalized. If we're not on their side, we won't find ourselves on God's side. That was the rich man's mistake. And that is our lesson for today. We need to narrow that chasm. Well, so how do we do that? How do we make sure there's no chasm between ourselves and the marginalized? How do we narrow that chasm when we live in a society where so many things conspire to keep us separate? Well, first, we need to do something that I was trying to explain to the kids. We need to identify with the marginalized persons. A marginalized person is someone viewed as insignificant or peripheral to society at large. Marginalized people can include racial or ethnic minorities. Marginalized people can include sexual minorities, like LGBTQ folks. Marginal groups can include people who are disabled. Marginal groups can include people who can't provide for their material needs. When we see a marginalized person, we need to think of him or her as a human being, just like us. We need to think about how he or she is like us. How are we like them? When we hear a story about a marginalized person, we need to think about how would we feel if that happened to us or one of our loved ones. Marginalized people are not just statistics. They are beloved children of God. So we identify with the marginalized. Next, we need to educate ourselves. We live in a society that likes to keep us ignorant about those people at the bottom. We live in separate communities. We frequent different businesses. We hang out in different social groups. So we have to educate ourselves. I encourage you to reach out to activists in your circle who work with marginalized groups. The Des Moines Area Religious Council, or DMARC, does a lot of work with marginalized groups here in central Iowa, and they are a great resource for us, especially since we have UCC churches involved with DMARC's work. So educate ourselves. And lastly, we need to act. Identifying with marginalized people and educating ourselves are essential steps, but we still need to do something. Thoughts and prayers are a good place to start. Also, giving money to causes that aid and advocate for the marginalized groups. Write letters, demonstrate for people on the margins, and of course, vote. Because politicians love to use marginalized people as scapegoats, but don't fall for that trap. Remember what side God is on. And we definitely want to be on God's side. And that's what we can do. Identify with the marginalized, educate ourselves, and act. And that is how we narrow the chasm. This is a scary text. It's not easy to deal with. But I think that when we kind of strip away sort of the storytelling method of the parable, we can see that the lesson doesn't have to be scary. It's not so much about who is and isn't affluent in society. It's about who are you seeing yourself in solidarity with? Who are you connected to in this world? The rich man's problem wasn't that he ended up in torment after he died, and that now there was a great chasm between him and Lazarus. The truth is that chasm already existed. He may have known Lazarus' name, but he probably didn't see him, despite the fact he was right on his doorstep. We are called by God to live in solidarity with the marginalized, because that's where God is. If we are with them, we will be with God as well. So that's what we need to be working